16, I was a baby nerd, writing poetry and short stories about girls who sat on the side of a reservoir at night in existential splendor. It was 1995, and I was enamored of Neil Gaiman's Sandman comics. Thank you. I was going to Comic-Con. I was going to dress up as my favorite character, Death. I'd been practicing my eyeliner, feathering my hair. I even bought an Ankh. I told a friend about my intended cosplay. He gave me pity, as if he were breaking bad news to me. Liz, you can't be Death. Death is white. So I wore no costume to Comic-Con. I hovered around the Batman Forever booth, memorizing the lyrics from Kiss from a Rose on the Grave by Seal. There is so much a man can tell you, so much he can say. You remain my power. I was grateful my friend had stopped me from making a fool out of myself. Of course Death was white. All of my favorite characters were, and I wasn't. Here's the thing about living in this body of mine. There is a narrative assigned to me immediately. Not that narratives aren't assigned to everyone at first glance, but mine, the story of this body, is othered as soon as contact is made. Brown skin, dark hair, prominent nose, the shovel-shaped incisors of indigeneity, ethnically ambiguous, the garb and language of modernity, but wouldn't I look good on a t-shirt surrounded by wolves? My smile, white and wide in a brown face, could sell the shit out of hot sauce. Look, an exotic. There were occasional other exotics of my ilk sprinkled in the pop culture I consumed. A.C. Slater from Saved by the Bell, Ricky Vasquez in My So-Called Life, Tito the Chihuahua in Disney's Oliver and Company, Salma Hayek's breasts, any number of maids and she-gangsters. As I grew older, I continued writing, keeping my stories and poems to myself. I stayed on my existential kick, experimenting with vampire erotica, keeping my narrators and characters faceless, no skin color or culture to disturb the reader into classifying me or putting me into an ethnic box. I wasn't really ashamed of my brownness, I told myself. There just wasn't a place for it. The only culturally relevant literature that centered bodies like mine was about a girl growing up in a house on a street named after my favorite tropical fruit. When I became brave enough, I signed up for a creative writing workshop. My stories were second-person narratives about shitty relationships. If you've never been to a writing workshop, they mostly function in the same way. The writer silently listens to feedback on their work. They cannot respond. They cannot defend their work. They listen. I scoffed when someone asked me why I didn't write about characters like me. Experience, I countered, is universal. Then my life flipped. I saw an advertisement for a workshop for writers of color, held in San Francisco. They had scholarships. I applied. I was accepted. For the first time in my life, I was in a writing workshop surrounded by people like me, in skins like mine, children of immigrants, bodies who have lived in the skin of oppression and invisibility, folks who cringe and challenge appropriation and tokenism. Being around all writers of color blew my mind open. I started to see where I had hidden my experiences to make a white audience feel safe. I felt all my latent shame begin to dissolve. I wasn't going to hide who I was anymore. When I came home from Vona, I came home fierce. I started recognizing the little ways people remind me I'm an other. I joined a casual writing group with a few people I didn't know, including the ever-present, sarcastic hipster racist. He's so ironic, don't you think? Oh, you're a Latina? Let me guess. You write about immigration and the moon? Yes, puto, because I am a child of immigrants and the moon. You're a white guy. Let me guess. You're going to wax poetic about the Pixies, Fugazi, the Big Lebowski, maybe Hunter S. Thompson? Do you like craft beer? As a writer, workshops and community are important. Writing is often very lonely. You spend endless hours mining your experiences and ideas, crafting story that speaks to you. I have my audience in mind. I know who I write for. And certain people get really fucking upset when you try to bring their attention to the ways their viewing of the world is problematic. I had a friend, a lovely woman, a feminist. She was getting her master's degree in English. She was one semester away from graduating. She called me sobbing. I thought that someone had died. She called to cry to me that the Jane Austen lit class she wanted to take was full, and the only available class for her to take to graduate in time was contemporary African American lit. The English department is being so unfair. What does African American lit have to do with me? The class is gonna be full of angry people. Let me get this straight, I asked her. You're mad because you're gonna be reading literary works by black people written in America, but you honestly believe you have more in common with 18th century literature about landed gentry than men and women who have lived in this land, people who tell stories about the world you're currently living in? I'm not racist, she protested. I know. No one thinks they are. But there is such a thing as being unaware of your prejudices and how popular culture has shaped the lens through which you view and live the world. Running immediately to defend yourself when someone tells you you're kind of fucked up, don't do that. I ghosted her. I hear she's a middle school teacher working with students of color. So the cycle continues. I kept running into the same shit over and over again. I'm not particularly confrontational, but mostly because I know I go from 0 to chola in 2 seconds, and I don't like scaring people. I was once the only brown woman in a workshop self-defined as prestigious. I literally started carrying a bottle of tequila in my purse during the workshop because the only way I could handle it was nestled in the loving arms of agave. I knew I was in trouble the first day when a man shared an excerpt from his antebellum novel. His main character was a good man, a kind and generous man, and he owned a plantation. He owned slaves. But he was a good man. They loved him. His property, whose bodies burnt daily in the sun as they gathered cotton he could sell to buy even more slaves. Slaves he'd also be good to. In fact, as a sign of their love and gratitude for him, they taught him how to do yoga. I was aghast. Then I almost fell out of my chair when the first person to comment on his story said, "Thank you. Thank you for writing this. I forget that Black history is real history." I wanted to speak up, but and what will continue to tire of being the person who always has to stand up and say, "Hold up, this needs to be discussed. Representation matters." There is a dance. Any other person can tell you, whether brown or black, two-spirit, gender non-conforming, crip, accented, or any of the myriad of other labels assigned to you by life. You will at some point have to challenge the assumptions. Immigrant, sexpot, working class, survivor, terrorist, victim. How will you dance in your language to code the conversation for safety? When will the cloaks of invisibility get lifted from the pages of past and present history? We have always been here. The last writing workshop I attended was a small thing. I read a pretty rad excerpt from my fantasy novel in progress. Sexed up anthropomorphic jaguar women warriors, a king with an Oedipal complex. I thesaurus.com the shit out of the language and sat back waiting for feedback. The comments on my piece were good. I had interesting characters, believable world building, complete with temples, pyramids, clans of magical creatures, excellent word choices. Then he spoke. The middle-aged white man who'd been giving me the curious eye all evening. He cleared his throat. Your story was fine, but to be completely honest, I couldn't really pay attention. I was too distracted trying to figure out your ethnicity. It only got weirder from there. There are warriors in my book who paint their faces to distinguish themselves as elite. In my text, I describe them as having triangles of black and red on their cheeks. A well-meaning white woman had a historical note to give me. You say triangles, triangles. She gave me an apologetic look. The Greeks invented geometry. Your Mayan-based world wouldn't know anything about it. I kept silent. You have to know when to be still and when to strike, like the serpent. The Mayan knew nothing of geometry. I wanted to shout, then who built the fucking pyramids? Who built the fucking pyramids? It still makes more sense to some people that little gray dudes descended upon the earth in spaceships and built the savages' temples than the idea that my ancestors were fucking badasses. I don't attend workshops anymore. One of my mentors told me enough. The workshops you attend aren't helping you. They're just another way to distract yourself from the real work, the writing. So I write. I allow myself to travel back into the desires of teenage me, little girl me, and I write the stories of badass, flawed, warriored women for today's young women need. I write us into fantastical places, imagination, glory. The landscape of publishing is shifting. Our stories are finally being asked for and, more importantly, demanded. I write fantasy. I'm not a baby nerd anymore. I'm a grown-ass nerd. I write wild warrior women with brown skin and sharp teeth, and I don't ask anyone for permission or approval. I have a secret desire. I want to be successful. I want to read my stories and novels to audiences full of faces that look like mine. I want the baby nerds of today to get excited. I want them to practice their cosplay, plan their costumes for Comic-Con. I'm writing to give them someone to dress up in, skins to slip into that are as familiar and magical as their own. Thank you.